Okay, that's a good idea. Okay, Rosh Hashana, we have Aleph Dalet.
Yeah.
For 2 months, the witnesses may desecrate the Sabbath for Nisan, if it's Tishrei. For on them the messengers go forth to Syria, and on them they fix the holy days. And when the temple was in existence, they desecrated even for all of them because of the determination of the time of the sacrifice. Whether it is the new moon, whether the new moon was clearly visible or whether it was not clearly visible, they could not desecrate the Sabbath because of it.
They can.
What did I say?
You said could not.
You're right, again. Make a new halacha.
Sometimes I let you get away with mispronouncing things, but I can't let you mispronounce.
No, that's just too important. Whether it was the new moon was clearly visible or whether it was not clearly visible, they could desecrate the Sabbath because of it. If Yossi says it was clearly visible, they could not desecrate the Sabbath because of it. It happened that more than 40 pairs of witnesses passed on the day to the Beis Din, and Rebbe Akiva detained them in Lod. Rebbe Gamliel sent him the following message: if you detain the public, you are placing a stumbling block in their path for the future. A father and a son.
Nope.
And,
That's me.
That's it. You're up. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So father and son, Avu Bano Shirao is a Chodesh. So now both of them have got this thing, and let's say it's even talking about a case where you have to be Mechalel Shabbos.
Right.
So what's the point of them both going? Because you can't have the father and son being witnesses. Okay. Yelchu, says the Mishnah, let them go. Not that they can join with each other. It's just that you're adding more witnesses to the mix. That if, let's say, the father tries to testify and they find a psul in his testimony, then they can bring the son to join with a different witness.
I was also thinking of the concept of chinuch. If it was a younger son,
no, it's not a chinuch. It's not a chinuch. The younger son can't testify.
He can't do it. But I thought maybe for chinuch purposes, he would be coming along to see what was going on.
That's one of the things I would imagine that it would be usher to do, because you've got a heter for somebody who can actually make a difference. But
he came along.
Who said that you're allowed to bring a non-bar mitzvah boy when his edus won't be useful anyway? So what, you're going to be mechanel him that he's allowed to be mechanel Shabbos for nothing?
Right. I forgot the cut, the big Mechal Shabbos. Okay. All right.
Rabbi Shimon Omer, Avu beno v'chol hakrovim kesherim la'edus hachodesh. Rabbi Shimon has a chiddush over here. He says that all relatives, father and son, or two brothers, or whatever, we're allowed to have them testify together for edus hachodesh. Okay, I doubt that the halacha is, the halacha follows the chachamim on this. Omer Rabbi Yossi Maseh b'Tovia Harofe Shira is a chodesh b'Yerushalayim. He saw Rosh Chodesh he saw the Ibor in Yerushalayim. Hu b'no v'avdo mishochrar. So he and his son and a freed slave. So all three of them went to the Mikdash to testify. But Kiblu HaKohanim Osov Es Benoah. So the Kohanim had a particular attitude about Yichus. Their idea is that an Eved Meshuchrar, we can't accept an Eved Meshuchrar. He's got no Yichus. How can we accept his Eidos? So they accepted Tobiah and his son to testify, and they puzzled the slave. But fortunately the Kohanim are not the ones in charge of the Beis Din. Kiblu Osov v'es Avdoi v'upaslu es Benoi. They accepted him and his slave because the slave is a perfectly valid witness. Once he's Meshuchrar, he's 100% Yehudi, and therefore his edus is good, and he's not related to Tobiah, so they could testify together. But his son, they couldn't testify together with him because he's a relative. And that is the halacha, obviously, and but it's interesting as a sort of a cultural reference that the Kohanim were a bit snobbish about Yichus. Perhaps that's part of their thing, is that, like, we're Kohanim, we're Miyul Chasim, and therefore we only want people who are Miyul Chasim to be able to give Eidos. Anyway, Mishna Ches, sorry. So here are the people who are pasul from giving testimony. Now, what this Mishnah is going to be telling us about is not about the ones who pasul midoraisa, because that is obvious enough. What they're going to give over here is a list of people who are pasul midrabanan from giving edus. Hamasachek bekubia, a gambler, and a gambler is not somebody who, like, occasionally goes and has a night's entertainment, playing the tables, playing a bit of poker or whatever. That's not a gambler. This is somebody who makes his panasa out of gambling, which means that if he's making a panasa out of it, he's cheating. Because you can't make a panasa out of gambling without cheating. It's just, the odds just don't work.
Right.
Okay. So now, if he's accustomed to cheating people out of their money, then you can't accept his edus on anything. Okay. Malve beribis, also people who lend at interest. Now, lending at interest is an iser midoraisa, but if a person is a mumar l'davar echad, it doesn't make him pasul to everything in the Torah. However, because he's making his living illegitimately, we disqualify him from edus midorabanan. Okay, mafri chayonim, people who fly pigeons. This is also sort of under the category of gamblers. It's a tough for us.
Because they race the pigeons.
Yeah, and so it's basically the same. It's the same idea as the gamblers, the people who are playing dice. Okay, but sochre shvius, and people who deal in shvius produce. In other words, they're making money out of selling shmita produce. Again, illegitimate, ill-gotten gains, and we don't allow them to testify. But avadim, that is avadim who have not been freed. So zehaklal, the general rule with slaves is kol edus she'ena isha kasherela ap hein einan kasherim. So while avadim are Jewish to some extent, in Evet Knani, he has to be circumcised, he has to keep kosher, and has to keep Shabbos and all these things. But he only has to keep. But he's just like a woman. He's part from mitzvahs aseh man grama, and just like women, he can't testify on anything that a woman can't testify on. So for things like it says, there are some things that a woman can testify on, which Shahati points out is like testifying for edus isha, saying that a woman's husband has died, that a woman can testify for, and similarly an eved can testify for that, or also testifying about a sota that she's become tameh. In other words, preventing the sota from from drinking the water. Just see, I'm going to close the door. Okay, so those are things that is anything that a woman is allowed to testify for, and if it is also allowed to testify for. Okay, Mishna Tes Mishra is a chodesh ve'eno yachol lehalech. So if you have somebody sees the new moon and he can't go, and he's incapable of walking, whatever, he needs he's crippled. Molichin oso al hachamor, you can put him onto a donkey. Afilu b'mita, even if you want to carry him on a stretcher. So you can have other people carrying him. Again, this is even on Shabbos. Let's make sure that we're saying this right. Yeah, this is talking about on Shabbos. So if the chole sees the ibor, and he says, I want to go to Yerushalayim, so other people are allowed to pick him up on a stretcher and carry him all the way. Okay. If there are people lying in ambush, if they know that the roads aren't safe, they can take weapons with them. Sticks or whatever, guns, whatever they need to defend themselves, they're allowed to carry with them on Shabbos. And if it's a long way, and if it's a long journey, then they can take food with them, whatever they need to get them to Yerushalayim safely. So if you're at most a night and a day's journey away from Yerushalayim, you can be Mechalel Shabbos in order to come for Eidos of Chodesh. Now, this is not going to work if you're in the Galil and you have to walk 2 or 3 days in order to get to Yerushalayim. That's definitely pointless, because by the time you get there, your Eidos is going to be irrelevant. But if you're living anywhere within a 1-day journey from Yerushalayim, then your Eidos could potentially have an effect, and then you're allowed to be Mechalel Shabbos on us. And now the Mishnah states explicitly what's the heter. Shenemar Ele Moadei Hashem Asher Tikru Osam B'mo Adam, that you must call them out in the time, even if it requires a Chilul Shabbos. That's the lamdas there.
I've noticed in these Mishnayos that it's almost like random. Anyone who saw the new moon, who wanted to go to Yerushalayim, that was fine. I guess they didn't have like designated people who were watching to see. And
this is a mitzvah that belongs to the whole Am.
Right. Anybody can just go, and it's not like the Mishma that we had by the Kohanim, where they had.
It turns, no, it turns. You can't predict who's going to be able to see the new moon, especially during winter when it's cloudy and
right. Yeah.
You don't know who's going to be able to catch the new moon through a gap in the clouds.
Okay.
Beta.
So, if this is Gimel Hay.
Yeah.
If an animal died, one may not move it from its place. There was an incident, and they asked Rabbi Tarfon about the matter and about challah, which had contracted tumor contamination. He entered the house of study and asked. They said to him, he may not move them from their place. We may not be counted initially for the meat of an animal on Yom Tov, but we may be counted for this meat prior to Yom Tov and slaughter and apportion it amongst ourselves. The Yehuda says a person may weigh meat against a utensil or against a chopper, but the Chachamim say we may not use a scale at all. And we may not sharpen the knife on Yom Tov, but we may sharpen one against the other. A person may not say to a butcher, weigh me out a dinner's worth of meat, but he may slaughter an animal, and they may appoint him a proportion of the meat among themselves.
Okay.
I was thinking of this mission last night. My wife and I, was our 53rd English anniversary, so we went out for dinner. It was a meat place, and I'm watching the guy do the knives, one knife against the other.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the Mishnah,
Yeah, good. Yeah, that makes you think of Mishnah.
Right. Okay, we have Yoma. Zion Bait. If one who sees the Kohen Gadol when he reads cannot, right?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. Zion Base, yes.
One who sees the Kohen Gadol when he reads cannot see the ox and the he-goat as they are burned. And one who sees the ox and the he-goat as they are burned cannot see the Kohen Gadol when he reads, not because he may not, but because the distance between them was great, and both services performed at the same time. If he read the Torah in the linen vestments, he then washed his hands and feet, undressed, went down into the mikveh and immersed himself. He came up and dried himself. They brought him the golden vestments. He dressed and washed his hands and feet. Then he went out and sacrificed his ram and the ram of the people, and the 7 unblemished male sheep in their first year. This is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva says they were brought with the daily morning offering as well as the ox for a burnt offering. But the he-goat, which is done outside, were brought with the daily offering, afternoon offering. Excuse me. He washed his hands and feet, undressed, went down into the mikveh and immersed himself, and came up and dried himself. They brought him white linen vestments. He dressed and washed his hands and feet. He entered the Holy of Holies to remove the ladle and the shovel. He washed his hands and feet, undressed, went down, immersed himself, came up from the mikveh and dried himself. They brought him golden vestments. He dressed, washed his hands and feet, and entered the holy to burn the afternoon incense and light the lamps. Then he washed his hands and feet and undressed. They brought him his personal clothing, and he dressed, and they accompanied him to his house, and he made a feast for his friends, having left the temple safely. Okay. One more. The Kohen Gadol serves an 8 vestments.
No more.
That was it? Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder why they did that. Why did they dry off and dress him down in the mikveh area rather than coming up where there are lots of people, in the courtyard and so forth?
He's going to get undressed and dressed in front of all the people.
No, but he did. They did do it up. He came upstairs and they put a cloth around him. They talked about that. Talked about that in the Mishnah. Why don't they do that down in the Mishnah? I mean, in the mikveh rather than.
No, they do. It was only the first one where he was out, where he had to toivel outside the Kaddish area because only the first Tevila was done in the outer mikveh. Everything else was done in the inner mikveh.
The reason being?
Because the first one makes him tahor for the day.
Okay, right. Okay. So there you go. All right.
Okay. Erevin Beis Vav.
Buff, base buff. Said Reb Eli, I have heard from Reb Eliezer, even if it is as a base core. I have also heard from him, if one of the residents of a courtyard forgot and did not participate in the Erev, his house is forbidden to him with regard to bringing it into and taking out of it, but he's permitted to them. I also heard from him that one fulfills his obligation on Pesach with Akravim, and I made the rounds of all the students and sought corroboration.
Is a species for maror, according to him, but it doesn't look like anyone agrees.
Corroboration, and yet I did not find. Any food may be used to make an erev or a shituf except water and salt. Any food may be purchased with tithe funds except water and salt. One who vowed to abstain from nourishment is permitted water and salt. One may make an erev for a Nazir with wine or for an Israelite with truma. Sumcha says with non-truma. For a Kohen is a base pras. Rabbi Yehuda said even in a graveyard because he may go make a partition and eat. We may make an erev with demai, with first tithe whose truma has been taken, and with second tithe or consecrated produce that were redeemed, and kohanim with challah or with truma. But with untithed produce, nor with first tithe whose truma has not been taken, nor with second tithe or consecrated produce that were not redeemed. If one says his erev with a deaf mute, a mentally deranged person, or a minor, or with someone who does not accept erev, the erev is not valid. But if he instructed another to receive it from him, the erev is valid. Okay. Paya. We have Daled Aleph.
I see Vav Aleph, no?
No, not what I say. Daled Aleph? No. Vav.
Yeah.
Beit Shammai says the renunciation of ownership is in favor of the poor is a valid renunciation of ownership. And Beis Hillel says it is not a valid renunciation of ownership unless it is declared ownerless in favor of the rich, also as the Shemitah. If all the sheaves of the field are of a cob, each one is of 4 cobs, and he forgot. Beit Shammai says it is not a shechicha, and Beis Hillel says it is shechicha. The sheaf that is close to a stone fence or to a heap or to cattle or to implements and he forgot, Beit Shammai says it is not shechicha, and Beis Hillel says it is shechicha. At the beginning of a row, the sheaf opposite proves that the sheaf that he held to bring into town was forgotten. They agree that it is not shechicha.
Okay.
Caleb. Okay, we are into Caleb. Caleb Aleph Zion. Walled cities are holier than it, in that Mitzorim are sent out of them, and a corpse may be carried about within these cities until they desire. But once it is taken out, it may not be brought back. Within the walls is holier than they, in that we may eat Kedoshim, Kalim, and Maisa, Sheni there. The Temple Mount is holier than it, in that Zavim, Zavos, Nilos, and women who have given birth are not permitted to enter there. The Chayil is holier than it, in that non-Jews and people contaminated with corpse tumor are not permitted to enter there. And the women's courtyard is holier than it, in that Tevel Yom is not permitted to enter. They enter there, but they are not obligated to bring a Chatas offering for entering it. The Israelites' courtyard is holier than it, in that Muksar Kapurim is not permitted to enter, and they are obligated to bring a Chatas offering for entering it. The Gahanim's courtyard is holier than it, in that Israelites are not permitted to enter there except when they are needed, for leaning, for slaughtering, and for waving. Between the Ulam and the altar is holier than it, in that Kohanim with blemishes or untrimmed hair may not enter there. The Hekel is holier than it, in that one whose hands and feet are unwashed may not enter there. And the Holy of Holies is holier than they, in that no one may enter there except the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur at the time of the service. Rabbi Yossi said, with regard to 5 matters, the area between the ulam and the altar is on a par with the chekel, and that those with blemishes or untrimmed hair, or those who have drunk wine or with unwashed hands and feet, may not enter there and must remove themselves from the area between the ulam and the altar when the incense is burned.
Okay.
Okay.
Baba Basra.
Okay, we have base olive. A man may not dig a pit near the pit of another, nor a ditch, nor a vault, nor a water channel, nor a launderer's pool, unless he distance them 3 tefachim from the other's wall, and plaster them with lime. One must distance olive refuge, manure, salt, lime, and stones 3 tefachim from the wall of another, or plaster it with lime. One must distance seeds, a pillow, and urine 3 handbreadths from the wall. One must distance a mill there. One must distance a mill 3 tefachim as measured from the lower millstone, which is 4 as measured from the upper millstone, and an oven by 3 tefachim is measured from the base, which is 4 as measured from the rim. And a man may not place an oven in the house unless there is a height of 4 amos above it. If he wished to place it in the upper story, there may be a layer of plaster 3 tefachim thick beneath it, and for a stove 1 tefach. If it caused damage, he must pay for the damage. When Shimon says they stated all these measurements only so that if they cause damage, he should be exempt from paying. A man may not open a bakery or dye shop under the storehouse of another, nor a cattle shed. In truth, in the case of a storehouse of wine, they permitted these except for a cattle shed. A store is a courtyard. One can block him by claiming, "I cannot sleep due to the noise of those entering and leaving." One may make utensils and go out and sell them in the marketplace, but one cannot block him by claiming, "I cannot sleep due to the noise of the hammer, or the noise of the mill, or the noise of the children."
Okay. Well,
Great. Rosh Hashanah, thank you. Have a great day. Enjoy. And I will see you, Mr. Shem, tomorrow. Oh, wait, you know Mr. Tyberg, right? You're friends with him?
yeah, Rabbi Tyberg, sure.
Right. So